Él es profesor adjunto de neurocirugía en la Universidad de Stanford y es director del Neural Prosthetics Translational Laboratory, uno de los grupos de referencia internacional en el desarrollo de interfaces cerebro-máquina. Antes de incorporarse como profesor, fue investigador y postdoctoral en Stanford, donde participó en el desarrollo de la primera interfaz cerebro-computador capaz de decodificar el lenguaje con un vocabulario amplio, que fue un hito clave en el campo de la neurotecnología aplicada a la comunicación. ¿Vale? Su investigación ha sido reconocida con múltiples premios en el Brain Computer, en el Big Society, y ha tenido muchos premios en distintos años, y su trabajo abre nuevas posibilidades para la recuperación del lenguaje y la comunicación en personas con lesiones neurológicas graves. Digamos que sería cuando nuestros canales habituales fallan, pues el arte busca otros canales, que ya es lo último que nos queda. Acabamos hoy. Y Frank, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and we are excited to hear you. Thank you.
Still okay?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay.
Now.
All right. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to tell you guys about my work on brain-computer interfaces for restoring communication. So first, I just want to start with the clinical needs. So this is a picture of Stephen Hawking, who famously had ALS, although he was a brilliant theoretical physicist. But his ALS and his paralysis prevented him from being able to speak fluently and communicate easily to others. And so this is what the problem that our lab is trying to solve by creating brain-computer interfaces that can allow people with paralysis to communicate more fluently and more rapidly. So just taking a look at Stephen Hawking's brain here, we can see that there's nothing wrong with his brain itself. He was a brilliant mind and his cognition was intact. It's just that his motor intentions inside his brain could no longer reach out into his body and allow movement. So our lab uses brain-computer interfaces to take signals directly from motor areas of the brain, process them to understand what the person wants to say or do, and then reroute them to an external device. So for example, it could allow someone to control a computer cursor, to control a computer, or nowadays, recently, we've been working on speech, so it could, convert what they're trying to say into words and speak it for them. So that's the basic idea of what our lab has been trying to accomplish and improve over the years. So our lab uses intracortical microelectrode arrays called the Utah array, which is just an array of electrodes that penetrate the cortex about 1.5 millimeters and record single neuron activity from the brain. So at each electrode, there's surrounding neurons that are firing action potentials, and we're recording the electrical activity, and we're getting these single neuron responses, and we're aggregating their responses together to try to estimate what movements the person is trying to make. So each neuron communicates different type of information about movement. So for example, one neuron might fire more when you want to move the computer cursor up, and another neuron might fire more when you want to move it to the left, and so on. And so we aggregate the information across all those neurons to try to understand what the person is trying to do. So this is an example video from our early work. This is kind of where we started with a point-and-click interface, so I'll play this. So this is a person with ALS who is using a brain-computer interface to control this computer cursor purely with their thoughts, and they're typing out a sentence on the screen, one letter at a time. So they move the computer cursor to each letter and they click on it in order to type. And this could allow someone to communicate at about 30 to 40 characters per minute. So at the time, this was super exciting and was the best, highest performing brain-computer interface in terms of how quickly and accurately you could select things and type things. So that was in 2017. And I'll just show you another video so she could also use that to, browse the web and just control a computer in general. So that was really cool. But just to put this into context, so we can put all the way on the left the speed of a brain-computer interface point-and-click system. That was that work I just showed you, done in 2017, which was about 8 words per minute. But we know humans can communicate a lot faster than pointing and clicking on single letters at a time. So normal handwriting is around 20 words per minute. Average person typing on a QWERTY keyboard is about 50 words per minute. And then speech is all the way on the right. So formal speech and conversational speech are around 120 to 150 words per minute. So we know that speech can go and a lot faster than point and click typing. So the question we've been answering over the past few years, and what I'm going to talk about mostly in this talk, is answering this question: can BCIs based on faster behaviors like handwriting and speech improve communication rates? So how much can we push this concept, and can we get all the way to the right where we're restoring, fluent, rapid communication to somebody with paralysis? So first, I want to start by sharing our work on a handwriting BCI. So this was done in 2021. So to use this BCI, a person would imagine writing each letter they wanted to type, one letter at a time. So this was a person with spinal cord injury who is paralyzed from the neck down and could no longer move their hand. They would simply, imagine that they were holding a pen in their hand and try to write the letters one at a time, even though they couldn't move. And we're recording neural activity from motor cortex here with 2 microelectrode arrays. And we're detecting each letter one at a time and trying to type that on the screen as we detect it. So that was the concept. But before we could even do anything with the BCI, we had to answer just a more basic question. Does the neural representation for a highly dexterous skill like handwriting remain intact years after paralysis? So this is someone who hasn't written for over 6 years, and it was an open question. Well, do the details of these movements, are they still maintained in the brain, and can we still see them even after so long? So to answer this simple question, we just had the participant do this simple instructed delay task where we just put a single letter up on the screen. We would ask them to try to write that letter. And then we would go on to the next one. And then we asked this question: can we reconstruct the imagined pen tip trajectory from the neural activity? Because if we're able to reconstruct the shapes, then that kind of suggests that the details of that activity are still there. So we applied this very simple decoding function here, where we're reconstructing the pen tip velocity as a linear function of the firing rate. So we have 192 microelectrodes that are recording neural activity, and we're just putting the firing rates of all of them, so how quickly the neurons are firing around each electrode, and we're just trying to linearly map that to imagined pen tip velocity. And when we did that, we were, very encouraged to see that we could reconstruct a lot of these different shapes. So it's not perfect, but you can kind of tell for each of the letters what the person was trying to write. And you can see that all the major features of the letters are still there. So that was encouraging to us that the representations still were still there. And then we said, okay, so how can we turn this into a brain-computer interface to allow somebody to type and communicate? So this is the system that we used. So we extracted threshold crossing rate features from the neural activity, which is basically just a measurement of how quickly neurons are spiking around each of the electrodes. We trained a recurrent neural network decoder to take time steps of this neural activity and convert it into character probabilities. So at each time step, it's outputting how likely it is that the person is writing each of the different letters. And then we could either threshold these probabilities to, capture discrete characters and put them on the screen one at a time. Or we could use, more advanced language model, like, for example, like an autocorrect system that you use on your phone to kind of clean up some of the errors and infer what the most likely sequence of characters was. And we also looked at how this could improve performance. So I just want to show you a video of what it looks like in real time. So to evaluate the system, we put up sentences on the screen, just random sentences. So here it says, Lowell felt like a soldier on a battlefield, stripped of ammunition. And we just ask the participant to try to copy these sentences, and then we can measure how accurate they are and how fast they are. So this shows you an example of him using the system in real time. So he's just typing the characters one at a time as we detect them and putting them on the screen. So hopefully you can see it's working pretty well in this example. So, okay, that was just one example, but how does the performance look overall? So on the left, we're measuring the speed of the system. So characters per minute, how many characters he's able to type per minute. And then we have 5 days of data. And we can see in the beginning, he's about 60 characters per minute. And then over time, he's able to improve his speed to around 90 characters per minute, which is really exciting at the time because that doubled the speed basically from the point and click system. So that was indeed an improvement and kind of a validation of this concept that we could use these faster, more complicated behaviors like handwriting and speech maybe to improve speed. And then on the right is the accuracy, so character error rate, what percent of the characters were wrong. So without a language model, it was around 5% of the characters were wrong, so 1 out of 20. And then with a language model, it was less than 1%. So that was also really exciting because it's accurate enough to be used to communicate. If somebody had no other way to communicate easily, they could use this and be readily understood. So that was really cool. And then here's just another video to kind of show you the point of how this compares to the older point and click system. So on the top is the participant typing the sentence, imagine all the people living life in peace using the handwriting system. And on the bottom, he's using the point and click system. So it just kind of shows you that it really is faster. So that was an improvement. Okay. So just putting that into context. So we tried handwriting, and encouragingly, we got speeds that were pretty close to just able-bodied normal handwriting. So that was 18 words per minute versus 20 for normal handwriting. So that begs the question then, what about speech? So there was a lot of work being done at this time suggesting that we could also decode speech from the brain. So there was folks working on ECOG grids showing that you could decode speech using ECOG grids. And then we had also shown that you could decode speech from hand area of motor cortex using these intercortical microelectrode arrays that recorded single neuron activity. So that's when we said, okay, let's try and do this in speech areas of motor cortex. So let's put these arrays in ventral motor cortex and see how well we can decode speech. So here's an example of what the BCI looked like. So to use the BCI, this is a person with ALS who could no longer speak intelligibly. And to use the BCI, they would try to say what they wanted to say. And that would evoke neural activity in these speech-related regions of the brain. So we placed 4 64-channel microelectrode arrays here. And then as we detected each word, we would display those words on the screen. And then we could also speak those words using simple text-to-speech system. So the methods we pulled mostly from the handwriting work. So it's very similar idea and very similar methods. So we're extracting local measures of spiking again, and then we're using a recurrent neural network to map neural activity to this time phoneme probabilities. So phonemes are the building blocks of speech, just like characters are the building blocks of written words. So phonemes are just the fundamental sound units of speech. So we're decoding the probability of all of those. So we used 39 here. And then this time we have to use a language model to convert this into text because these are sounds, and then we want to convert it into text so we can put it on the screen. So we have to use a language model to look at all these probabilities and infer the most likely sequence of words that would have given rise to these. And okay, I'm going to show you a video of what it looks like in real time of a person using the system. So again, on the top is the sentence that they're supposed to say. And then when the square turns green, they're going to try to say that sentence. And then I'm just going to show at the bottom of the screen one word at a time as we detect it. So these are just random sentences that we picked from a corpus of spoken English. So that's why they're a little bit weird. But you can see that she's able to get a lot of the words, and it's way faster than what we were doing before. So I don't know if you could hear the sound on that, but if you could hear the sound, you could also hear her vocalizing. So she can still vocalize when she tries to speak, but it's impossible to understand what she's trying to say. And here's an example of her using the system to express her own thoughts. So she can also use it, obviously, to say whatever she wants to say, not just copy sentences. So you're gonna see her answer the question, "What are you proud of?" So she says, "I'm a very good friend and sister." Okay, so that was a few examples, but how does the performance look overall? So on the left here, I'm showing speed. So, oh, sorry, accuracy. So this is word error rate percentage. So how many of the words were wrong? And we're looking at two different vocabularies. So we're in red, we're looking at a large vocabulary of 125,000 words. So that with that system, a person would basically be able to say whatever they wanted to say. And then in blue, we looked at a smaller vocabulary system, 50 words, with the idea that, maybe a smaller vocab would be easier for us to decode because there's fewer possibilities, but, would be more limited for the participant, but they could still maybe say a few important words and phrases. So that was kind of the motivation. And you can see that for the open vocabulary, or for the large vocabulary in red here, about 1 out of every 4 words are wrong. So 25% word error rate. So it was very encouraging first demonstration that, we can still decode many of the words correctly. And that was kind of inspired a lot of the following work, because it was kind of a first landmark demonstration that, we could achieve levels of accuracy that could potentially be clinically useful. So that was exciting. And on the right is the speed here in words per minute. So it's about 60 words per minute she was able to speak. So that was about 3 times faster than the handwriting system. So that was super exciting, because we're starting to get towards, fluent conversational speech, although it's still, about half that of normal speech. So just putting that into context here, again, handwriting is on the left at 20-ish. And then for speech, we're able to get up to around 60. So there was a couple of encouraging things here. So one was that we saw that performance increased as you added more electrodes. So this was a retrospective analysis where we decoded using offline, using different numbers of electrodes. And we found that there seemed to be a log linear relationship. Like as we added more electrodes to the decoder, the word error rate, was continuing to go down. So that was kind of suggested that maybe we could get even more accuracy just by implanting more electrodes. And so that was implemented very quickly after we did our work by our collaborators at UC Davis. So in their participant, they doubled the electrode count. So they had 4 arrays placed in motor cortex, so that we only placed 2 in motor cortex the first time and 2 in a different area of the brain that didn't end up working out. So they put all 4 into motor cortex itself. And they also improved the real-time language model. So, language models are always improving, and we're getting better at how we can decode stuff. And so that's another way to improve accuracy as well. And so with these 2 improvements, at UC Davis, they were able to lower the word error rate way down, all the way at the end to around 1%. So, up here is where we were at around 25%. And then with this new participant, they were able to get word error rates, down around, 0 to 5%. So that was super exciting. And I'm just going to show you a video of him using this system. So it worked so well, he's able to use it at home, and he uses it about 8 hours a day to talk to his friends and family and to work and, to live his life. So that's the primary way he communicates now, which is awesome that we were able to restore some function to him with this. And I'm just going to show you an example of him expressing his thoughts about the system using this. So he's saying, with the system, one of the things that people with my disease suffer from is isolation and depression because they do not feel like they matter anymore. And something like this technology will help bring people back to life and into society. So that's cool that he's able to express, these detailed thoughts using the device, and it's all works well enough to be understood. So yeah, and this is just the personal use interface that he uses. He also uses an eye tracker to press a few buttons on the screen, like to tell whether it was right or wrong, or to activate different modes. But the words on the screen are all the brain-computer interface device. So that was encouraging. So finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing very recently to try to make the device even faster. So, I just showed you evidence that we could get to around 60 words per minute, but of course, fluent speech is about twice as fast at around 120 to 150. And here I'm just putting the kind of 5 recent studies in this field on the left and the speeds they were able to achieve. So none of them were able to get all the way up to normal speech. And our hypothesis was that maybe this is because of paralysis, like maybe the fact that they're trying to speak but they're paralyzed is slowing them down and they're not able to reach normal speeds. So we thought, okay, what if they just purely imagined speech? So all the work that I showed you was with them actually trying to physically speak, and then we detect the signals that result from the motor cortex. But what if they just purely imagined the words in their head? Also known as inner speech or inner monologue or inner voice. So just imagining the sounds of the words in your head, could we still decode that, and could that allow them to go faster? So first, we just tested the speeds of this behavior to see if it was faster than attempted speech. And here are results from 3 different participants. And in blue, I'm showing you the speed that they can go when they actually try to speak. That's in blue. And then when they just purely imagine speaking, that's in orange. And so for all of these participants, imagined speech allowed them to go faster. And a couple of these participants, they were able to go all the way up to normal speeds. And this is just a quote from participant T15, kind of explaining what it's like to try to speak when you have paralysis. He says that attempted speaking is like you're stuck in quicksand and you have a weighted blanket or 2 on top of you. So it does seem like there's something maybe fundamentally limiting in terms of the speed if you ask somebody who has paralysis to try to speak. So then we did some experiments to see, okay, could we decode imagined speech, and what patterns of neural activity does it evoke in motor cortex? So this is our most recent work. And in this simple experiment that we started with, we just had 7 words, which we asked the participant to either attempt to speak, simply imagine speaking, or just listen to. And then we looked at the neural activity that we got back. So first of all, we looked at how well we could decode these different behaviors. So on the left are aggregated results from 4 different participants, and this is the motor cortex here on precentral gyrus, and each array is represented with a little square here, and the color shows you how well we can decode the words. So you can see that with attempted speech, all these arrays in ventral motor cortex give you some ability to decode and discriminate between these different words that the people are trying to say. But interestingly, when we go to just listening, so if we just ask the person just to listen to words, for many of the arrays, we can still decode what they're listening to. So that shows you that there's not just motor signals that exist here. There's also signals related to listening or processing the words. And then, even when you ask them to just imagine the words, imagine hearing these words or speaking these words, you can also decode. So it's a fainter signal than attempted speech, but for many of these arrays, you can still decode what they're trying to imagine. And we also looked at how similar the neural activity patterns were between these different conditions. And it's a bit of a complicated plot, but basically the take-home message is that if you look at how similar the different words are under these different behaviors, you see these bands in blue, which show you that words either spoken, imagined, or listened to evoke similar or correlated patterns of neural activity. So there's a shared representation of all of these words. And this just shows you a low dimensional representation of the neural activity. So if I just take the neural activity for each of these 7 words and do PCA to just visualize it in 3D, you can see here in solid are when they try to speak the 7 words, and then in dashed is when they imagine. So you can see that imagining the words basically gives you a smaller version of the activity that you see when you try to speak the words. And you can see when it's rotated this way, you can see that the neural activity is very similar. And then when you rotate away, you can also see that there's some separation. So we can tell when you're imagining versus just trying to speak, but the patterns are similar. So that was encouraging that there's activity related to inner speech and motor cortex. And then we said, okay, can we decode this in real time? Can we actually use this for a brain-computer interface? So that's some data here on the right showing you the word error rates we got when we decoded sentences using just purely imagined speech, and the word error rates vary by participant. So it wasn't as accurate as attempted speech, but still for some, it went all the way down to about 25% for one of the participants using a large vocabulary. So that was encouraging that this might be a method for, if we can get it more accurate, it could be a feasible method for decoding speech more quickly. And I just want to show you an example video of what this looks like to show you that it's faster and is approaching the rates of normal speech. So you're going to see this other participant do the same thing, where on the top, you're going to see the sentence they're supposed to imagine. And then on the bottom, as they're imagining it, you're going to see the words that our brain-computer interface is decoding. And it, just to show you that it's quite a bit faster. So this is still early days on a smaller vocabulary, but it is encouraging that we can get these high speeds. And then finally, it raises this interesting question of, okay, if we're able to decode inner speech, are we also able to detect spontaneous inner speech that a person might not want to communicate or say? So to answer this question, we did this task that we thought would naturally evoke spontaneous inner speech, this counting task. So we displayed this grid of shapes to the participants, and we told them to count all of a particular type of shape. And then we figured that, you know, they would naturally use inner speech to count these shapes. They would go like 1, 2, 3, 4 in their mind to keep track of the number of these shapes. And then we would be able to ask the question, can we detect these number words in their, you know, in their inner voice going up over time? And so on the right is just some data from one of the participants showing that, yes, you know, statistically overall, we were actually able to detect number words that were increasing over time. So here is a graph of, you know, for each point is the number word that we decoded. On the y-axis is its position in the sequence. So if we're decoding purely random numbers because we can't detect anything, then it should be a flat line. But if we're decoding numbers correctly, then the numbers should be going up over time, and they are. So that shows you that, you know, we're able to detect some traces of spontaneous inner speech that are even when the person isn't actually trying to communicate. And then we just demonstrated a simple mechanism for preventing inner speech from being accidentally decoded. So there's many ways you might be able to do this, but this is just one mechanism that we demonstrated, was a password protection mechanism where if the BCI was in locked mode, it wouldn't decode anything. So you could imagine anything you wanted in your inner voice and nothing would happen. And then if you want to turn the BCI on, you would have to imagine some unique keyword, for example, chitty chitty bang bang, so something long and unique. And then when the system detected that word, it would briefly unlock the system, and then you would be able to speak using the system. And we just demonstrated in the paper that we were able to detect the keyword 98+% of the time. So this is, we think, a reasonable method for preventing inner speech from accidentally being decoded. Okay, so now I just want to end briefly with our thoughts on where we think we want to go next with brain-computer interfaces. So where are communication BCIs going to go next? You know, one really encouraging thing is that translation of these systems is currently underway. So there's several companies making devices now to, you know, making fully implanted, wireless, more rugged devices with more electrodes to try and translate everything I showed you that we just demonstrated in academia. And, you know, I'm very encouraging and hopeful that this is going to work and be a real thing that people with paralysis can use to speak. So what are we going to do next, given this? So one thing that our lab is now focusing on is de-risking restoring communication in new disorders. So what I just showed you was all focused on ALS and brainstem stroke, which cause severe paralysis, but are quite small patient populations, all things considered. And we want to bring this technology to even more people so we can help restore communication in new disorders. So one thing that we're recently focused on is hemispheric stroke. So we recently received an award from the Marcus Foundation to expand communication BCIs to stroke. So just to set the stage of the problem, as we all know, stroke is very common. So in the United States, for example, someone has a stroke every 40 seconds. And every year, that's more than 795,000 people. And after stroke, we often have communication problems, as we know. So 1/3 of stroke survivors have communication problems. This is just an example of Broca's aphasia. This is the disorder that we're going to start with. So in Broca's aphasia, you have damage to frontal areas of the brain that prevent fluent speech, but you can still understand language, and you can still understand what people are saying, and you still have a sense of what you want to communicate and say. So I'm running out of time, so I won't play the video, but I think probably we're all familiar with Broca's aphasia. So, in Broca's aphasia, again, we have the motor areas are damaged, and it affects around 225,000 people. Your understanding of language is still intact, and there's currently no treatment for this, for chronic Broca's aphasia, really. So the vision here is to use a brain-computer interface to restore communication. So the idea would be to place a brain-computer interface in areas of the brain related to higher level thoughts about what you want to say. So our hypothesis is that placing the brain-computer interface sensors in temporal and temporal parietal junction areas of the brain could allow us to extract information about the thoughts the person wants to communicate and is trying to communicate. And if we can detect that accurately enough, we could, either turn that into text to help them say that, or speak that for them. And we also think, this could restore communication, and it could also help people more effectively, rehabilitate if they have this rapid feedback of how to turn their thoughts into sentences. And then, so this is also partly a software aim and a neuroscience aim, where we're going to try to figure out these new areas of the brain and how to decode from them. And that's also a hardware problem, where we're working with the University of Michigan to develop these new things called these motes, which are these tiny grain of dust-sized motes that sit on the surface of the brain and communicate wirelessly. So at Stanford, we're going to be mapping speech in the temporal lobe and trying to decode speech from the temporal lobe. So this is moving outside of the motor cortex, and it's going to be a huge new challenge for us, both decoding-wise and neuroscience-wise. Okay, so that's that. Just wanted to give you kind of an idea of where we think the field can go next, and what we're doing next at Stanford. But just to conclude, so what did I show you today? So I showed you that highly accurate speech decoding with large vocabularies is possible. So I think that's going to be a real thing. And I think inner speech is a pathway towards conversational rates. So that's what I showed you at the very end, that maybe with inner speech, we can get all the way to fluent conversation at the speed that people would normally speak. And, so what I didn't show you today is that, there's still some ongoing challenges, and, maybe we can talk more in questions. And, but I just wanted to highlight briefly that, we're still going to have to overcome the problems of decreasing variability in performance. So hardware challenges, targeting them all to the right brain areas, and understanding the effects of disease states, so different types of ALS and stuff like that. So I think these are challenges that these companies that are translating it are going to have to solve. And also that, finally, new disorders are a big opportunity for communication BCIs, for example, aphasia, like I just talked about. So with that, just want to thank you. Thank you for your time and attention, and thank you so much for having me. So am I still sharing, or hopefully not? But
thank you, Frank, for your impressive and inspired talk. Let's see if there are any questions in the room. Preguntas.
So, as you were saying, in those ongoing researches with new, like maybe for aphasia, do you think it would work, like maybe like as a translator or something, like not for the whole aphasia, but maybe for bypassing paraphasic issues, for example? I don't know if question.
Can you say more about that? What would the idea be?
Yeah, because I'm seeing like for oral motor disorders is okay, but what happens when aphasia, with sensory aphasia issues, like for example with the paraphasias, and do you think, like almost as a translator, maybe the person is saying something wrong, and it could correctly like at the same time. You need like a translator.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's a lot more challenging, but I think that could be really cool. You know, I think the less you know, if you don't have reliable signals about the sentences and the words the person wants to say, then you have to go even higher level into like you know, semantic areas of the brain, or you know, areas of the brain that have just like the pure concepts of what, and that's even harder, but I think would be really cool if we could do it.
Más preguntas? Yeah, I have one question because as far as I know, your technique is always recording signals from the neuron, and I am wondering if you have, if you know if there are some devices that also stimulate the neurons and then record, because we are using transcranial magnetic stimulation for aphasia, and our goal is to stimulate, you know, and I don't know if your devices are able to stimulate and then record in order to promote the plasticity.
Yes, they can stimulate. You know, there's been a lot of work done in this with our type of devices on restoring sensation. So restoring the sense of touch for controlling a robot arm, for example, or for restoring vision. So that these devices can stimulate. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk offline about ideas for how we could use these to promote plasticity, that'd be awesome. It's not something that we know a lot about, or that we have plans for right now, but I think that's a cool idea if we can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, because it's a coincidence, but this week here in Spain, we have a group that has inserted a device for blind people, and after take it out, they found that even without the device, one of them can also see. So,
cool.
Yeah, it's coincidence, and it's this week. So thank you, Frank, for your patience with us and your collaboration, and it's a pleasure to hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Muy bien, pues.